Serge Rubinstein had a life made to be turned into a movie. His father was a financial advisor to Rasputin, the mystic with supposed supernatural powers who was arguably at times the most influential man in Russia. The family eventually fled the country during the revolution, with young Sergei escaping with a fortune in jewels sewn to the inside of his pants. He grew up and went to the University of Cambridge in England, studying economics under John Maynard Keynes. People would say many things about Sergei in his life. They'd call him a financier, a draft dodger, a playboy, a paradox, and a little lost boy. But one thing that they would never say was that he wasn't smart. Sergei was one of those people that have to always be in motion. When he was a teenager, he asked his parents to get him an appointment with a famed psychoanalyst in order to confirm he had an inferiority complex. He was short and had a love for Napoleon to the point of often dressing up as the general as an adult. The doc told Sergei he was neurotic but warned, "I can cure your neurosis, young man, but do you want that? You'll be just an ordinary person. The way you are now, you'll be driven by ambitions and desires." Sergei passed on the cure. Upon graduating, he moved to France, where his life of international scheming began. Him and his brother had invested everything in a ballet show that failed. So Sergei was stuck in a country where, because he was an immigrant, he couldn't get a work permit. There are, of course, other ways of making money. He knew that lots of well-off Russian families had stashed funds in Swiss banks before the revolution. He then presented himself as a student to many of these banks, telling them he was hoping to do research on the financial system and asking for access to their books. Eventually, someone said yes, and after poring over their ledger, he found a name he recognized as belonging to a deceased person, found their heirs, and secured a $17,000 finder's fee from them in thanks. This would be equivalent to several $100,000 today. His next act, according to most sources, is going short the franc so significantly that it destabilized the currency, leading to his expulsion from the country. However, in an interview with True, the Man's magazine, Sergei claims that's all made up. Pierre Laval threw him out of the country for a wrongly held suspicion that Sergei was sleeping with his wife. Who knows what's the truth? Now, for the big one as far as this video is concerned. Chosen Corporation was an English company with several gold mines in Korea. In 1933, the owner, who was a promoter kind of like Sergei, but not nearly as smart, had to do a prison stint. During that time, from buying shares from the jailed owner, plus some more on the open market, Sergei became the controlling stockholder. He then leveraged that position into getting the company to issue him many more shares while only requiring him to put down 20% of their cost up front, which solidified his position of control. It is alleged that he never even bothered paying that 20%. Eventually, though the stock soared at first, he was accused of defrauding investors by shifting Chosen Corp's assets to other personally owned and controlled companies by, quote, switching them back and forth among 4 Delaware companies, 4 New York companies, 3 Texas companies, 4 British companies, and a Japanese company. So he was good at what he did. But prior to that, here's how he acquired some of those assets. Sensing war coming to the region, Sergei sought to lessen his exposure to the Far East. He was able to liquidate part of his gold mining operation by selling to a Japanese company for 13 million yen. After this, he encountered a problem. Japan didn't want him taking all those funds out of the country. This was the Depression era, so presumably they wanted as much of the yen as possible hanging around, stimulating the domestic economy. They allowed 6 million to leave, but said the rest has to stay. This was not so much a problem as a puzzle for Sergei and his associate Peter Stickgold. Sergei sent Peter to Japan with the task of getting the rest of the money, or at least as much as he could. The stakes were high. Peter could have been executed were he caught smuggling, and the puzzle was a tough one. Upon arriving in Japan, Peter was horrified to learn that the largest banknote in the country was only about 100 yen. That would be a lot of paper if they were going to get out 7 million. Regardless of what their final plan would be, Peter knew that the first step was to go and announce that he's there on business. He's looking to find certain products to export that upper middle class or upper class Americans will be interested in buying. And then he goes to the bank and sees how much of the work could be taken care of purely via bribery. The bribes allowed him to take 300,000 yen per day out of the banks. Peter went out and started withdrawing the daily limit, storing it in a trunk in his hotel room, all the while trying to figure out how to hide it in a way that could get it through customs. One day he saw how obis, which are the large ribbons that tie a kimono shut on a person, are shipped. They are wrapped around a large sealed tube, and inside that tube would be the perfect hiding place for stacks of yen. Except it wasn't really that easy, because the weight of the yen and the stuffing to keep it from bouncing around would make the packages suspicious in terms of weight. So he went out and found an obi manufacturer and told them he had a request. He needed lighter obis than the ones they were making, and not silk either, because he couldn't afford it. Or more correctly, it would make the whole enterprise unprofitable. He wanted the rayon obis to be made thinner and thinner. When they questioned him, saying, among other things, that he could just get rayon obis cheaper in the US and not have to worry about export, he flattered them and said that it's really the design of all the Japanese artists that was the most important. On the thin material holding up, he said that women weren't probably going to wear them anyways. Instead, they'd be hanging them from their walls. He ordered 1,000 obi samples and 600 normal ones to mix in with them. The thin obi could conceal 3,000 yen before becoming overweight. Peter took days then, unrolling obi, filling the tube, re-rolling them, sealing them. He pretended to be sick so that the hotel staff where he was staying wouldn't get suspicious of why he never left his room anymore. And it worked. 3 million of the yen left Japan. Sergei and Peter worked to get a huge security force sent to the port to receive him so that no one could steal it at the last second. This show of force then brought media attention. It was clear that money had been smuggled out, and people were left to speculate as to how much. That's how, for the second time in his life, Sergei was involved in a plot that briefly affected a world currency, as people feared that the amount they got out could have been massive. There were non-financial escapades as well. Sergei attempted to dodge the draft for World War II, both by using a fake Portuguese passport and then by purchasing an airplane company involved in the defense industry and attempting to have his ownership backdated so that he could claim his work was critical to the war effort. This was the one notable time where he didn't get away with something and ended up doing over 2 years in prison. Afterward, though, nothing changed. Sergei continued amassing wealth by dubious means and generally screwing over his investors until someone had enough. In 1955, his butler discovered him bound to his bed and strangled to death. There was no sign of forced entry, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. Still, the joke was that police had narrowed the suspect list down to 10,000. And to this day, it is still a New York City cold case. At Sergei's funeral, the rabbi presiding didn't hold back. He said, "The word paradox best describes the strangely complex, ambiguous, and unquestioned psychopathic personality of Serge Rubinstein. He possessed a brilliant mind, but was utterly lacking in wisdom, a man who was his own worst enemy, a man whose intellectual endowments promised so much, but whose deficiency in moral fiber proved his undoing." They did make a movie based on his life, debuting just a year after his death. They titled it The Death of a Scoundrel. Thanks for watching, guys.